From the headquarters of FtS English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Communities continue to mobilize in Colombia after more than 3 weeks of protests that have often been repressed by the police. Demonstrators have reported more police repression in the city of Popayán as their presence has intensified. On Tuesday, activist Deiner Seferino Yunda Camayo was shot dead by police during one of the social minga protests in the department of Valle del Cauca. Communities demand that the government fulfill its agreement regarding their lands and rights. The dialogue between them and the government was called off on Tuesday as the protesters say the government has not agreed to certain guarantees.
We are very concerned about what the Minister of Defense has said. We are victims because they have fired on us. They fired on us in El Cairo, in the tunnel, in Suarez, and they fired on us even in Patico, a town where a lot of indigenous people and campesinos have been victimized, because the security forces are using live ammunition on us. There is evidence of that. There are videos. The defense minister has said he doesn't care about human rights, nor about life. Therefore, the defense minister is responsible for everything that happens here during the Minga.
Meanwhile, activists in Belgium continue their march towards The Hague to deliver a letter to the International Criminal Court. They're demanding an end to the persecution of social leaders in Colombia. On Wednesday, they were joined by Colombian Senators Gustavo Petro and Gustavo Bolívar, who expanded why this march and the social mingas are taking place.
The international community does not care about the real issues facing Latin America. The region is only seen as a giant oil exporter. Our social needs and struggles have all been ignored. We are trying to reignite the fight for peace and democracy and are calling on the progressive parties in the EU to support us. This will place much needed international attention on our need for peace and democracy. Latin America cannot continue to be the land of death, violence, and authoritarianism. The dictatorships from 30 years ago, which stifled our hope in democracy, are returning. Now Latin America must forge a new path through democracy and peace.
Colombia is marred by impunity. These armed groups are never prosecuted. We hope that the relevant international bodies will help us. The Inter-American Commission for Human Rights has already heard our demands, and we hope the ICJ will intervene and launch an investigation in Colombia.
Our correspondent in Bogotá, José Manuel Jiménez, has more about the Minga social developments.
Leaders of the social Minga in Cauca, in the southwest of Colombia, are giving a news conference. Their main spokesperson is the community leader José Ildo Pete. They're condemning the various acts of violence perpetrated during the last 24 days of this Minga or protest. These include the death of 8 indigenous protests in Dagua in Cauca, as well as the death of another community activist yesterday in the Cairo district of Cajibío. These killings, which followed attacks by the security forces on the protests, have become a subject of intense political debate in the country. That's why they want to condemn them in front of the local and international media. They want the media to publicize their demands for respect for their human rights and their right to protest, as well as for the fulfillment of the series of agreements that they reached with previous governments. They're also repeating their demand that President Iván Duque come himself to the region to meet the indigenous, campesino and Afro-Colombian representatives. Meanwhile, there are still attempts to hold talks with the government in Mondono and also in Buenaventura and Delfina in the Valle del Cauca. Yesterday, there were sharp exchanges in a Senate committee between senators of the opposition and those of the president's Democratic Center Party. This was because community leaders from the Minga had traveled to Bogotá to put their case to the Senate committee. But the senators of the governing party tried to stop them from appearing and insulted them. So it seems that neither the government representatives in Congress nor the president himself want to listen to the demands of these communities or speak to their leaders in person. We should also add that on Tuesday, the indigenous organization in the Amazon region, announced new protests in 15 communities of Putumayo department in the coming days. They're calling that the big Putumayo Minga, and it's another sign that this social minga is continuing to spread throughout the country. The governor of Nariño has added his voice, asking President Duque how many more people have to die for you to agree to talk. It's the same question that the communities in this minga are asking, as well as many more people throughout Colombia.
We thank Jose Manuel Jimenez for that report. On Tuesday, Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly approved the government's Plan de la Patria 2019 to 2025. ANC's President Diosdado Cabello says the approval is in compliance with the Venezuelan Constitution.
I want to ask this Assembly to approve the Plan de la Patria 2019 to 2025, so legislators in agreement signal, as is customary, with two hands, for the nation, for Chavez, for Maduro, for children, women, youth, soldiers, workers, for people with disabilities, for Afro-descendants, for sexual diversity, for the elderly, for the whole nation. Approved the Plan de la Patria 2019 to 2025.
President Nicolás Maduro has expressed his satisfaction with the approval of this law through social media on Tuesday. The president said he was grateful to the National Constituent Assembly for the approval of the Plan de la Patria, which has become a constitutional law. The document was debated across the country and on commissions inside the legislative body. And Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly also approved a constituent decree to strip immunity from opposition figure Juan Guaidó. He has played a central role in an attempted coup against President Nicolás Maduro. The body also ordered authorities to continue an investigation into Guaidó. He has been under investigation since January when he violated a travel ban by visiting a group of countries whose leaders recognize him as interim president. Finally, Venezuela will leave the Organization of American States by April 27th after authorities condemned its interventionist policies and promotion of a coup in the country. Venezuela's ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, accused the head of the organization, Luis Almagro, of seeking to bypass the necessary 24 votes in the General Assembly to request an invasion for humanitarian reasons. He said the OAS cannot unilaterally recognize governments or allow other countries like the U.S. to impose its recognition on other nations. He said that the Monroe Doctrine promotes international chaos and is a clear violation of every country's sovereignty. Moving on, WikiLeaks said President Lenín Moreno wants to illegally terminate Julian Assange's asylum to cover up the offshore corruption scandal involving him. Assange has been living in Ecuador's London embassy for nearly 7 years. Our correspondent, Denise Herrera, has more.
A strong condemnation of Assange from President Lenín Moreno.
Too many times, Assange has violated the agreement made with his attorney on his behalf. He can speak, but he cannot lie. He can hack numbers in private accounts, but he cannot breach policies, because he is in Ecuadorian territory.
However, Carlos Poveda, Assange's lawyer, has rejected these allegations against his client. The entire defense team of Julian Assange highlighted that they are really worried about Assange's health.
He has aged. For 7 years, he hasn't seen the light of day. He's had limited access to medical care. There are restrictions. He needs to see a medical specialist, but he's had no access. The legal team is also restricted. The last incident with the journalist shows that there are limitations, and it's very difficult to visit him.
President Lenín Moreno also denounced WikiLeaks before the UN for hacking private information and publishing it in digital media. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
In Peru, the General Workers Union is staging a protest to reject the economic policies of President Martín Vizcarra. Workers and unions from Arequipa have called for other organizations to join them and reject the government labor reform. They consider the plan only favors big capitalists. Workers are also marching to oppose water privatization and in solidarity with the Fuerabamba community, who are protesting against mining interests. Veterans Day was commemorated in Argentina on Tuesday for the fallen soldiers in the Malvinas War. 37 years have passed since the conflict started between Argentina and the UK in the South Atlantic. Former combatants and political bodies have been questioning the agreement signed between the current government and the UK.
The decision to discard the historic claim for sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands and signing agreements that benefit the UK and the Argentine Southern Sea is causing controversy.
Since the first moment of the identification of the buried soldiers of the Malvinas, Ramos Padilla worked with us. I believe it was him who started to discuss this crucial topic. Argentine society and the ex-combatants wanted to know the identity of the fallen, and he felt the obligation to find the identity of those who fought and died for our islands.
Macri's government prioritizes dialogue with the UK and relinquishes claims of sovereignty over the Malvinas, destroying a path that was being forged in favor of the claim of the sovereign rights of Argentina, enhancing the unity of Latin America against colonialism.
Sovereignty cannot be surrendered. We are concerned by the actions that have been taken, and in honor of our fallen soldiers, we really don't want to give up even more than we already lost in terms of our sovereignty.
Ex-combatants have demonstrated in front of the Palace of Justice to endorse and thank the judge Alejo Ramos Padilla, who started the investigation identifying fallen soldiers during the 1982 conflict, who were buried in the Darwin Cemetery.
We believe this is a mistaken policy. The only thing it does is give away our sovereignty, our territory, and all the previous governments' years of struggle, alongside the whole of Latin America, against the UK's claims.
We are publicly trying to show the way that the Macri government is failing to claim this island for what they really are, Argentine territory.
Whilst Argentina reaffirms its deep commitment to the Malvinas cause, Macri's government makes a diplomatic shift that relegates the claim for sovereignty, prioritising commercial relations with the UK and leaving to one side the interests and feelings of Argentinians for the islands in the South Atlantic.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Trinidad and Tobago is no longer in a recession. Trade and Industry Minister Paula Gopi-Schoon made the announcement saying the country had a small growth for 2018. She says the government is hoping to build on that growth this year, as she called on manufacturers to help in those efforts. Manufacturing contributes over $4 billion to Trinidad's GDP. Manufacturers are already exploring wider Caribbean and extra-regional markets, such as Cuba.
For the rights of ordinary citizens, for work.
Opposition political parties in Haiti have refused to hold talks with the president, Jovenel Moïse. Talks were scheduled for Monday, but the leader of the Democratic and Popular Movement, Andre Michel, says all the party wants is Moïse's resignation. He said the party wants a clean slate and is not interested in dialogue or negotiations with Moïse. Two other opposition parties have also turned down Moïse's invitation to attend the meeting. They too are demanding that the president step down. A one-week gun amnesty is set to start on Sunday in Barbados. Persons with illegal firearms, parts of firearms, and ammunition will have from Sunday, April 7th until midnight on April 13th to turn them over to the nearest police station. No questions asked. Attorney General Dale Marshall made the announcement during a parliamentary debate on the Bail Amendment Bill 2019. He also warned criminals not to test the government's resolve because it was not something they would be flippant about.
Washington, D.C.
Meanwhile, importers caught bringing banned disposable plastics into Barbados after July 1st may have to fork out $25,000 in fines or even face a year in jail if convicted. It's the last straw, so to speak, as the government brings down the gavel on persons who import, sell, or use single-use plastics or cutlery after the deadline. An offender who continues the practice may also be fined $500 for each day the offense continues. A full ban on petrol-based plastic bags will take effect from January 1st, 2020. Michaela Simpson, popularly known as Coffee, is the youngest reggae artist to reach #1 on the Billboard Top 100 chart. At just 19, Coffee's debut EP, Rapture, also made it to the top of the iTunes reggae chart. The spot has also been held by reggae legend Bob Marley, off and on for a long period of time. A Pagua parade with a difference has taken place in Queens, New York, to uplift the identities and voices of the LGBTQ Hindu community. The Indo-Caribbean and South Asian Social Justice Organization led the march, with participants waving the rainbow flag during colorful celebrations. They're advocating for full inclusion and the right to practice their religious values equally. Holi, or Pagua, throughout the Caribbean, is an Asian Hindu spring festival of unity, renewal, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Algerians have vowed to continue protests to demand change of the country's government. Before turning in his resignation, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika appointed a 27-member cabinet to run the country until a new president is chosen. However, protesters are calling on the authorities to allow them to choose their own leaders. And the former president has praised the Algerian youths through a farewell letter, calling them ambitious and optimistic. Bouteflika said humans are prone to make mistakes and that he should be forgiving for all his shortcomings. He says, "I speak to you farewell, and it is not easy to express my true honest feelings towards you." Honest. A vaccination campaign has been launched to contain the cholera outbreak in Mozambique's Beira, which was hit by Cyclone Idai. As of Tuesday, officials had reported 1,428 cases of cholera and 1 death. The outbreak was declared on March 27th. Damage to water and sanitation infrastructure, coupled with the dense population, have raised fears that another epidemic would be difficult to control in Beira.
So this is one of the key issues we have to look at, that really everybody who is concerned has been reached at the end of the day. So in the beginning it will be easy, but then we have to look for those people who might have access problems, maybe in outlying villages and districts where we haven't reached, or who cannot come to the immunization centers. That's why we need to get out, we need to go out and reach them. We know that the whole campaign is now planned for 6 days, so within these next 6 days all the 900,000 people in total 4 districts should be reached. And again, we're starting today already with more than 500,000 in Beira. We're pretty confident that we'll reach the target.
And in Zimbabwe, a grain milling association has established a program to feed children in Zimbabwe affected by Cyclone Idai. The association has started distributing food to the affected areas, focusing on schools and working with the government to identify areas in need of assistance. Divisions and infighting have escalated in Zimbabwe's main opposition party ahead of its Congress in May. These fighting comes amid allegations that some senior officials of the Movement for Democratic Change are imposing their own candidates. The party's Secretary General, who is seeking the presidential post, attributed the chaos to some leaders within the party who want to plant hatred between him and the current leader.
What is ironic in the MDC is that the people who are bringing these allegations are people who split from the party, who took money away from the party, and who called Changrai all sorts of names. And they came back to the party. We have accommodated them, and what they are trying to do is to drive a wedge between myself and Nelson Chamisa as a way of getting an accommodation. Fortunately, MDC members are intelligent enough to read through it.
The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is set to be implemented as it gets its final ratification from Gambia. Gambia became the 22nd African country to ratify it. This means the bill now has the minimum number needed to come into effect. The trade bloc, spanning 49 countries with a combined GDP of $3 trillion, will facilitate inter-regional trade. It will also boost growth and help alleviate poverty in Africa. If implemented, this will help Africa move away from reliance on European bureaucratic trade institutions. Angry residents in the township of Alexandra in South Africa have staged a shutdown protest over increasing illegal structures and service delivery in the area. Hundreds of protesters are demanding better services and living conditions from the government ahead of national elections next month. Various streets were barricaded with burning tires and rocks.
We are fighting for Alexandra and we want Ramaphosa to come here so we can talk him face to face. There are a lot of things happening here in Alexandra. Locals have no jobs, instead foreigners have jobs. We are not fighting anyone. We just want Ramaphosa to come here so we can speak to him. Even where I come from, it's the same situation. So Ramaphosa needs to come here so we can confront him. We are fighting for our rights.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The large number of migrants detained at the U.S. border with Mexico has led to many being released. The U.S. government decided to reduce congestion at its detention centers by taking migrants hundreds of kilometers to cities like Albuquerque, San Antonio, and Phoenix. They were later released at truck stops or near churches. U.S. migration figures show that more than 125,000 migrants have been released from detention with their families. The British Prime Minister Theresa May and leader of the opposition Jeremy Corbyn have met to discuss the UK's Brexit plan. The offer of talks from the Conservative leader shows she wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit, which is set to happen on April 12th. No deal is the preferred option for some right-wing elements in the Conservative Party. The Labour Party leader was expected to argue for a closer relationship with the EU, along with protections for workers' rights and the environment.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's offer for talks following the meetings that I've held with members across this House and look forward to meeting her later today, and I welcome her willingness to compromise to resolve the Brexit deadlock.
And in the context of a growing climate of right-wing radicalization in the UK, footage has emerged of British soldiers on duty in Afghanistan using the face of Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn for target practice. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed the footage legitimacy. The United Nations says a quarter of the world's health facilities lack basic water services. The problem impacts 2 billion people. In the poorest countries, about half of facilities have no basic water services, and the World Health Organization says 15% of people who go to a healthcare facility get an infection and 1 million die due to unclean births.
Sort of pushing this and reporting on it.
There are around 1 in 5 births globally taking place in least developed countries. In the JMP report, we show that just half of healthcare facilities in least developed countries have basic water services. So what that means is that if half of the births in least developed countries are taking place in institutions, then around 17 million women in the world's poorest countries are giving birth in healthcare facilities with inadequate wash every year.
On Wednesday, Brunei introduced harsh new Sharia, including death by stoning for adultery and gay sex. The laws have been passed despite a storm of global criticism from politicians, celebrities, and civil rights groups. The laws, which also include the amputation of hands and feet for thieves, make Brunei the first place in East or Southeast Asia to have a Sharia penal code at the national level, joining several mostly Middle Eastern countries such as Saudi Arabia. Human Rights Watch Group says these new laws will turn the Sultanate into a human rights pariah.
This is a kind of law that doesn't belong in the 21st century, and we're astonished that, frankly, that Brunei is going forward with it. It's going to be something that will turn Brunei into a human rights pariah. And I think that it's a very, very mistaken move by Brunei and by the Sultan of Brunei.
And finally, Brazil's football legend Pelé is recovering at a hospital in France after he collapsed in his hotel room in Paris. The 78-year-old came down with high fever after he met with French forward Kylian Mbappé as part of an advertising campaign. The planned meeting with Mbappé had already been postponed last November due to Pelé's health problems. He is, however, said to be doing well as doctors continue to monitor his recovery. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.